Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Happy Sunday to all of you. I'm going to try to go through this really quick so that I can post this video before our live stream. Now for those of you that may not know, we have a live stream every Sunday at 9 a.m. Alaska time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So hopefully I'll be able to get this out before the live stream, and you'll know when we have our live stream in case you don't know. But ladies and gentlemen, this is not even our biggest threat. Satellite imagery shows global crop declines, except for Russia or China. I'm going to go through this article really quick so you can see where we are right now in the case of what satellites see and not what the USDA tells us. Because remember, the USDA will tell us, yes, we're going to have great crops. And then when they finally harvest those crops, we find out that maybe those numbers weren't very accurate. But there is a much bigger danger behind us having not a failed crop, but a crop that is of lesser value than it was last year. And it's not looking very good for us here in the US as far as the satellite imagery goes. But there is something, ladies and gentlemen, that we all need to know. And I've been talking about this, and I'm going to talk about it until everyone knows what it is. Please do your own research. This is going to be, or this is so dangerous to humanity, what's coming down the line and what is being practiced right now, that once it becomes mainstream, it'll probably be too late. But let's go over this really quick. Here it says, infrared satellite imagery designed to measure moisture levels in the health of farmland suggests that staple crops such as wheat are in poor condition and in sharp decline among major exporters, including the Ukraine. We all know that right there. The U.S. and India. And we all know that India put a halt to their exporting of wheat. Two countries do have bumper crops, however. And what are those two countries? China and Russia. Price inflation due to central bank stimulus measures has been enough to do incredible damage to the many national economies. But a single bad year for crops on top of this could spell disaster. Now, if we have a bad year this year, which I think we're going to have, we are going to be okay. We will be able to feed ourselves. We just may not be able to export as much. But the question is will the government allow these corporations to export for profit instead of leaving the food here in the United States where we need to have the food? I think you can answer that question for yourselves. Russia and China, on the other hand, are enjoying a strategic advantage. As we entered spring of this year, the mainstream media heralded the end of the Russian economy and the swift collapse of their war efforts in Ukraine. Today, Russia is selling more oil and exporting more commodities than ever before. And both Russia and China now have the most healthy staple crops in the world. It's almost as if the public in the West has been deliberately misled about our economic strength. All you hear in the news and by the pundits of the government is that we have the strongest economy in history. They're actually saying that. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. If you have eyes, if you have ears, if you can see and hear and reason, all right, even a small amount, you can tell that we don't. Now, here are the numbers that they came up with that satellite imagery. It shows that Russia is at a plus 6.5%, China plus 1.7%, Canada plus 2.7%, Germany is -5%, France is -5%, the US is -7%, India is -4%, and Ukraine at -24%. With decline in crop exports, food prices will rise even further, and there is also a possibility that Russia could cut off the EU and other nations from access to their agricultural markets. Already this month, Europe is on the edge of an economic cliff as they wait to see if the Russian maintenance shutdown of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline is actually temporary or the beginning of a full-bore energy crisis that will last for years. And this will be devastating for Germany and the EU as a whole. In other words, the temptation for the Eastern nations to use food as a weapon against NATO will be just as high on their list as oil and gas. With food and energy stability in doubt, there is also a considerable danger of civil unrest. Third world nations are likely to see the worst of the shortages, but price inflation is here to stay for first world countries as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't even consider us a first world country anymore. I think we're more of a second world country as we stand right now. And along with that comes all of the associated economic problems, including rising crime, rising unemployment, and rising poverty. And isn't that what we're seeing right now? Right now we are seeing a shortage of food for those that cannot afford the food. This right here, yes, this is a threat that we have a lesser crop this year than we did last year. This is a threat that Russia stops exporting food to those countries that need the food that are in Western nations. Right? This is a threat. But let me show you this right here. Dutch dairy farmer faces having to call 95% of his cows. New environmental regulations will require him to slash his livestock numbers by 95%. What does it matter, AP? We're in the US. It matters, trust me, because this is coming worldwide, right? He thinks he will have to sell his family farm. I can't run a farm on 5%. It's over and done with, he said in a July 7th interview with the Epoch Times. But listen to this. In view of the regulations, I can't sell it to anybody. So because of these regulations that they are imposing on these farmers and ranchers, they can't even sell their land, their farms and ranches to anyone because no one will buy it. Why? Because they can't operate a business with the regulations that are being set forth. Okay? But the government wants to buy it. And that's why they have those regulations, I think, he says. So they are imposing these regulations so that the government buys the land, has control of the land, and does what they want with the land. And more than likely, that will not be farming the land or raising meat on the land. Dutch nitrogen scientists question basis of government climate mandates. When it comes to the Dutch government's calculations of ammonia and nitrogen oxide deposition, the basis of climate mandates that would slash livestock numbers and put many farmers out of work is especially critical of the science. He thinks it relies on vague definitions, excessive deference to expert judgment, and a narrow focus on costs rather than both costs and benefit. And he says, we now treat farmers as polluters. End of story, which is a very strange perspective. But why, ladies and gentlemen? Why is it that this is going on in so many countries? Let me tell you why right now. So let me set this up real quick. So I was looking through the news earlier today, and I saw an ad pop up, right? And you know, ads pop up all the time. I see an ad pop up, and this is what the ad was for. It was for a company that was offering a service, and that service is ESG compliance. What does it mean, and how can you achieve it? ESG compliance. For those of you that have not heard about what ESG is a system that was created by the UN and is being passed down not to countries, but to corporations, to banks. And this is why, in my opinion, the Supreme Court judgment that came down not too long ago that said that the EPA cannot tell companies or corporations or manufacturing companies about how much carbon they put in the air. They pretty much says, no, you can't regulate that. You can't regulate how much carbon a company or a corporation can produce. It means nothing. It means nothing, ladies and gentlemen. Why is that? Because we work out of a system that is debt-based, meaning that if you want to run a company, you're going to need credit. You're going to need to borrow money in order to do it. You're going to need to have a line of credit. And guess who is in this ESG fiasco? The banks. The banks are. So eventually, your company or corporation A, B, and C, they're going to have an ESG score. And if their score is not high enough, they're not going to get a line of credit. And if they don't get a line of credit, they won't be able to do business. What is ESG compliance? In some areas, regulation governs ESG performance, and in the United States, it used to, as far as carbon being put in the air did, but not anymore because of what the Supreme Court came down with, right? So, for example, the Clean Air Act, for instance, regulates emissions in the U.S., while the Equal Pay Act prevents discrimination in pay and compensation. So, whereas law used to govern that, here in the U.S. at least, where law used to govern it, and it still does on paper, now whoever runs this ESG governs it. Whoever says what it is that the regulations that have to be passed or that have to be adhered to, not passed, but adhered to by those that are going to conform with ESG, those are really the regulations. Because if you want to do business, you're going to have to conform to ESG. And who runs ESG? The UN. And did we vote for the UN? Did any citizen of any country that votes in their representatives and their leaders, did they vote for the UN to act on their behalf? I would say not. So what are the risks of not being ESG compliant? As legislative imperatives around ESG grow, there are increased penalties for non-compliance with ESG principles. And these may be financial. Number one, financial, just what I talked about. I know, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm not very well spoken as far as putting out the message, but understand how important this is. How important this is to humanity, because I'm going to show you the next step. Once ESG is implemented, all right, once it's implemented everywhere and every corporation is using it, it's going to impact your personal sovereignty. But there is a little, what I would call a little mini ESG that will be attached to every single person in the world should this succeed. And not being conspiratorial. I mean, it's right here. You can do the research and you can see what's coming down the line. And you can see that they are talking about what's coming down the line for you, the person, the actual person, not the corporation, not the country, the person. Central bank digital currencies are coming. So just like these big banks are telling these corporations, hey, we're not going to support you unless you have a good ESG score, guess what's going to happen when they come out with a centrally banked digital currency and you now get your, I'll call it money for lack of better words, now you get your money from the Federal Reserve instead of from the actual government, right? Instead of having a monetary system that's run through the Treasury, we get our money only from the Federal Reserve. Guess what happens if you're not ESG compliant? Well, it'll be very easy for the Federal Reserve to make you ESG compliant because they can program your money to allow you or not to allow you to get what they want or don't want you to get. That's as simple as that, ladies and gentlemen. That's why it's so important that we prepare. We are either going to end up having a lot of suffering because we are in the fourth turning. If you haven't read the book, The Fourth Turning, look it up and read it. We are in the fourth turning, number one. So we are in the season of crisis. There's going to be a lot of suffering. But what comes next? If we are not aware of these things that are happening right now under our noses, then once all of this suffering is done with, and there's more to come, all right? There's more to come, much more suffering to come before we transfer over to that new season, which will be spring, which will be a great season, a great time to be alive. But we still have several years of what I would call a dark winter, because that is the fourth turning. It's the winter part of the seasons. What will we have when we turn into spring? And that is going to depend on how informed we are now of what they are trying to do. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and see if I can put this video up so I can get to you all before the live stream. I hope that you are there at 9 a.m. this morning, Alaska time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Having said that, we will see you then. God bless every one of you.